What are inflation index bonds? Now usually if I take a very simple example of fixed deposit, what we call as FD, what happens? This FD is a conventional bond. Why conventional? Because at the time you are investing, let's say I invest 1 lakh rupees. When I am investing 1 lakh rupee upfront, I know that I would be getting a 8% rate of interest, which is also known as the coupon rate. We call it as an interest rate or a coupon rate. Now this is a case with a conventional bond. However, inflation index bonds do not work in the same way. Inflation index bond work taking into account the inflation. Now what is the difference? When I am saying on 1 lakh I am getting 8% interest, this 8% interest would be there for, let's say, 5 years. But after 3 years, the inflation jumped to, let's say, 11%. So whatever wealth I have accumulated turns out to be a negative wealth. So that means I am eroding away the money. However, what would happen in the case of an inflation index bond is this would be adjusted to what? It would be adjusted to the inflation. That means 1 lakh is what I invested today and the interest rate was 8%. I keep it simple. I take it 100, okay, just to make the calculation simple. And I have a interest rate of 8%. That means I would get 108 amount. But now let's say the inflation index bond is there and an inflation of 10% made my base amount as 110. Now when I am getting 8%, I am not getting on 100. I am getting that on 110. That means I am not getting 8 rupees as in the case which was previous. Here I am getting 8.8 rupees. So that is inflation index. That means 110 plus 8.8. That gives me 118.8. However, in the previous case it was 100 plus 8. That gave me 108. So rather than getting 108, now I am getting 118.8. That means this bond is inflation index. So if I take a quick summary of the difference between the conventional bond and an inflation index bond, it is very simple. Conventional bonds are like fixed deposits, Kisan Vikas, national savings certificates. However, government has proposed that there would be inflation index bonds like NSC or similar bonds issued by RBI. But as of now, we understand those under conventional bonds. So these conventional bond has a fixed interest rate and a regular interest payment. Right? That means if there is rising inflation, that would affect the amount that you have and that would erode the power of money that you have. On the other hand, inflation index bonds are adjusted to inflation. Since they are adjusted to inflation, with rising inflation, the base value of these bonds would rise. Since the base value would rise, they would be able to adjust to the inflation. Like in the previous case, we said with a conventional bond, you are getting a return of 108 on 100 rupees at 8%. However, considering a fact of 10% inflation with an inflation index bond, you would get 118.8 rupees. That means if it is 108 rupees and an inflation is there for 11%, you are there with -3. That means whatever you have accumulated would also erode. In the case of inflation index bond, whatever you have accumulated would still be beneficial over that 11% because you would still have a saving of few rupees despite spending that 11% on your expenses. Again, important thing is that these inflation index bonds can be traded in secondary market. The costing varies from 10,000 to nearly 25 lakhs. That is how inflation index bonds are issued. And another important thing about these inflation index bond is that these bonds, the inflation index bonds, actually are issued directly by the RBI, not by the secondary bank. So that's again a difference as in the case of India. So far, it is mandatory that inflation protects only the principal amount and not the interest. That means when I'm saying there is 10% increase or 10% inflation that I am quoting, that would be added to my base account. So this 10% inflation would be added to my base amount, which is 100. That 10% won't be added to my interest, which was already 8%, right? So one important thing that we need to understand when we talk about inflation index bond is that the amount is added to the principal, right, and not to the interest paid. The next is there is no special treatment for inflation index bonds. The tax provisions are applicable on the interest payment as well as the capital gains which are derived on the inflation index bonds. So that's how these inflation index bonds work. But in light of rising inflation, it's a good idea to take measures where inflation index bonds are preferred over a conventional bond, because conventional bond works on a fixed coupon rate, or what we say a fixed interest rate. Despite of that, the inflation index bonds are adjusted to the inflation, and therefore they do not let your money erode or does not give you a negative money in hand. We can say as simple as that. So this was a general understanding about the concept. If you have any questions, please feel free to raise those in the comment section below. Thanks for joining in today.